Today we're going to start with a panel with Antoine. Who here has never heard of Antoine?
I'll have a chat with you if not,
Well, he apparently does something with a website and some job website as well, and he works at WeTransfer, and he's a tall guy, so there's still a running competition between him and I think it's Ibrahim, what's his name?
Yeah, I get challenged every now and then.
Yeah. So we met a tall person at Swift Leads as well, and I'm not sure which of the two is taller. It's a close match.
Yeah.
So he's going to stand up in a few minutes, and then you can see how tall he actually is. I think because of his length, he also has like this humongous, huge dog. It's a Penner Senner, I think it is.
Yeah, Bernese Mountain Dog. Yeah.
It's like it's one of those dogs. If you throw a bucket of water on it, first of all, the dog will go like, okay, give me more. And the second of all, it has so much fur, but it just doesn't get any smaller, I think. Because some dogs, if you throw water on them, there's nothing left. There's just a small dog with like dripping water.
It's a big dog that thinks he's small, and he's like 50 kilos. So it's it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
I've seen pictures. It's not pretty once the dog is done with cuddling with Antoine.
Yeah, solving bugs is nothing if you have such a dog. Yeah.
So also he recently became a dad as well. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
And you're doing a mix of things, right? So you're working, but you're also doing something with an app and another app by now, I think.
Yeah.
And a website, and another website, and
too many things.
Yes.
Yeah.
So come talk to Antoine during the day about the stuff that he's doing, and if you can get some advice from him, because he has always had good advice to me as well. And I'm just going to give you the floor, Antoine.
Thanks a lot.
We have 3 people in the panel. We were supposed to have 4. Rudrank, unfortunately, is not with us today. Yes, now you don't have any trouble with the beamer anymore, right? It'll get better, like 45 minutes from now. And so Rudrank is unfortunately not with us. We thought, should we replace him? But we were like, but Rudrank, we cannot replace him. So we decided to go ahead with 3 panelists. And first we have Daniela. And then we have Tim. And finally we have Jeremy. So basically we did not give any instructions to the panelists. So they're sitting here not knowing what's going to happen. It'll not be bad, I promise. And it's basically going to be an interesting conversation, we hope. And there will be an opportunity for people to pitch in their thoughts and ideas.
Yeah.
But that's later, and Antoine runs the show, and he will clearly indicate when I need to start running around with this catch mic again.
Exactly, yeah. So think about a really good topic you want us to discuss. Tabs or spaces, yeah.
So, Antoine, the floor's yours.
Thanks a lot. This is actually something new. Jeroen and I discussed this event, Do iOS. It's actually very special to me. I expected Jeroen to shout that out as well, but I got my job at WeTransfer through a talk I gave here as a replacement for somebody that was sick. It's quite a special story if you think about it. So it's always special to get back here. And I told Jeroen, I would love to, for once, do a panel. I never did it, and I would love to see if I can do that, not knowing all the challenges that are behind it, the classic rabbit hole. For example, creating cards and making sure the logo is centered in the back. It's super challenging, but you won't notice. I also did some inspiration. Who ever went to WWDC's talk show with John Gruber? I see a few hands. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna be John Gruber now, all the cards, but he's talking with like big names from Apple. It's and all respect to you, by the way, because this is the best panel, obviously, right? But I actually wanted to start with you today, and I'm not sure how exhausted you are after yesterday's great party and social activities, but I would love to see how experienced you all are, and I'm curious if you will, but if you all want to stand up, and we stand with that, because I'm going to ask you a question. You can sit down, if you didn't develop apps for iOS 12? Right, right. You can sit down if you didn't develop apps for iOS 11. Okay, we've got an experienced crowd, I think. iOS 10. iOS 9. You know, maybe there's many people developing apps for banks and such, right? They need iOS 8? Yeah. 7? 6? Yeah, okay. 5? 4? iOS 3? So this was a tricky one, right? There was no iOS 3. Okay, there you go. All right, great. Thanks a lot. So this helped. I got quite some topics prepared for today, and I figured we would probably have a more, unexperienced audience. So I think we can go a little bit more in depth, which will be a lot of fun, I think, today. But yeah, I first want to do my own kind of introduction about you, because I researched you all, and it's not going to be that much in depth. But first of all, Ray Wenderlich, both of you worked for them. They made an impressive name change. It's super interesting to see how that will go. Codeco. I think there's a whole history behind the name change. It took a while to get to the name, I believe, right?
Yeah, it was
Definitely.
a year and a half, I think, of planning.
Year and a half. There you go. Yeah, and it's always surprising to me. It has always been Ray, his website. You still think about Ray Wenderlich. That's the original writer, I think, of Ray Wenderlich. But yeah, it's great to see the new rebranding, which made total sense. And Daniela, I was looking at your description on the website, and it was stating lifting heavy things.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about that?
Well, more of bodybuilding, lifting heavy weights, but yeah, I spend a lot of time in gym.
Gotcha. Interesting. And Tim, broken hands?
Yep, we'll do this again. Yeah.
Why?
Because I started the company with a friend of mine, and we wanted something that was just a bit more fun than your usual corporate, Software Limited or something, or Software Inc. And it's a name that seems to provoke a lot of questions, but also a name that seems to be remembered. So I think it's done the job.
Interesting. Broken hands. Okay, cool. Hey, and Jeremy, I was mostly curious about the Swift Academy that you are starting. Swift Developer Academy, if I pronounced it correctly?
So it is, I work for Block. I was an iOS instructor for them a long time ago when they were doing Android and iOS development. They have since shifted more to a full stack development bootcamp. But all of the boot camps that I found, none of them were good towards enterprise development. And my first enterprise job was quite a shock when I got into it. So the Swift Developer Academy is strictly enterprise level development. So it's not going to be the typical coding tutorials that you've seen or other boot camps you might have seen online. It's going to be completely different.
Interesting. And it's going to be an app, you told me, right?
No. So yes, we will be building an app, and eventually all of the content that is delivered from the website will be available on the app. But
Gotcha.
to start off, it will be web only.
Gotcha. I also want to thank you because I created trust this morning, and I want to slow down now, but focus and iterate. You remember that, right? We all watched your talk, and I found it super inspiring. So thanks for that. That brings us to our second phase of this panel, and I figured it would be fun to do a little pick a side, so to say. So yeah, let's just see where your opinions lie, right? So Tim, no more VS Code or no more server-side Swift?
No more.
No more, yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen, yeah. I'm very bullish about Swift on the server. Obviously, very selfishly, of course, because my career's staked on it. But like it's growing and growing every year, more and more and more. There's a lot more interest. And the questions I've seen over the last 2 or 3 years have gone from kind of more, is it production ready, to how do we actually use it? So I think there's an acceptance now that it's a real thing, and there's some really good examples of big companies using it. If you've ever watched a video on Amazon Prime, that's used server-side Swift. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of users. So it works, and it's just about getting there.
So no more VS Code.
If Xcode could iterate as quickly and split out Swift and the SDKs from Xcode itself, that would keep me more into Xcode, I think. But they'd also need to do more stuff around making it easier to develop on other platforms, building cross-platform compiling into the Xcode and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Who knows? Like they've got a good team. The Xcode team are a really good group of engineers, and they're always open to feedback.
Hey.
So you never know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think we all miss Alcatraz, don't we?
Yes.
Right?
R.I.P.
We all developed for iOS 6 and 7. The call it console, you had plugins in Xcode back in the days. Those were the good times.
Alcatraz was awesome.
Yeah, still miss it. Daniela, WordPress or Squarespace?
Oh. I would say WordPress.
It's an interesting one, right? You did your talk on Publish yesterday, and we had discussions about this as well with my own website. I'm using WordPress, by the way. It's an interesting decision, so to say. Jeremy, you told us that you are developing since 2009, I believe you said. So, pre-arc or pre-incremental builds?
Pre-arc.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Manageable.
Yeah. We'll go that route.
I think Daniel will join you. You have the asterisk, the pointer. Okay, I got one more for everyone. Tim, CocoaPods or cartridge?
Swift Package Manager.
We'll get to the discussion about these three, by the way. So.
I'm going to go for CocoaPods because cartridge never worked. There you go.
Perfect. Cool. Daniela, I was curious. What is your favorite simulator?
A rocket sim, obviously.
Hey.
That's the only correct question.
Okay, we're done. This is never going to get better. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Which simulator do you pick? I always find it fascinating, and I actually have data on it a little bit. But I don't know the most favorite one. Sorry for that. Maybe I'll get back to that. Jeremy, I have to ask: spaces or tabs? That needs to be part of it.
Tabs.
Tabs.
Yeah.
I think I looked back on a panel in 2015 with Chris Ladner. I'm looking at you. I'm not sure if you were there. It was at WWDC as well, and I think he chose spaces.
No.
But well, that was pick aside. I now actually want to go over some topics, and I actually had some discussions before this panel, like what do you want to see us discuss, and there's quite a few interesting topics. I'm not sure if I can get to all of them, but I at least also want to see if we can get a topic out of the audience in the end. Is that my microphone that's doing that? Not sure, but the first thing I wanna discuss with you is the state of Swift today, as well as where it's heading in the future. And I think Ben did an incredible job yesterday. I'm still impressed. Age 16. I didn't look, Ben, but when did you sit down earlier? iOS 7, iOS 8. iOS 12. Gotcha. Yeah, I was curious actually because you clearly showed that you already have a lot of experience in the Swift era. But Swift changed a lot. I've been there. Swift 1.1, I believe. There were no incremental builds, but it was still the new language. So I started developing. It was amazing. new language that looked beautiful, and you start to build out your project. It still builds quite rapidly, and then it grows. And you have no incremental builds. Well, I can tell you that's not fun. Then we had the fun of Swift 3, huge migration. We were still using packages like Swifty-JSON for decoding and stuff, which changed in Swift 4. Obviously, we got combine, async await. Altogether, I wondered last WWDC, like, what do I still ask myself? What do we still miss? So I kind of want to take you into this discussion. Where is Swift today? What do you think is still missing? And maybe we can start with you, Tim. I know you have a lot of experience in Vapor with some lesser known APIs, so to say.
Yeah. So I think Swift is it's in a good place. The team, the language team, the core team are doing a really good job of kind of slowly marching to the direction they want to go, with taking the route of accepting all of the contributions from open source, because there was a big risk when they open sourced the language that you get bogged down with bike shedding names of variables and stuff. And the original incantation of the SSWG, the server-side workgroup, which was a thing before the workgroup was formed, it descended into whether a request should be a struct or a class. And it was 3 months of arguments about that, essentially, before they decided to just go about it and do it themselves. And so I think they've got a good ownership model and a good direction they're going. I think, personally, I would like to see improved tooling support around the debugger, because it still crashes constantly, around expanding Swift Package Manager and some of the stuff around that, so around the package registry stuff, which we haven't seen really yet. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how the memory ownership stuff, so improving Sendable and basically shifting a load of runtime errors to compile time errors, is going to change things, because that's a really exciting area, especially for server-side worlds, where you can, because on the iOS app, on iOS apps rather, you have one user, essentially, and you might do some multi-threaded stuff or some concurrency stuff, but you're not really doing that much. On the server, you could have 100,000 users at the same time. So having that kind of safety built into the compiler, that if you're accessing 100,000 different things in a safe way, is a really interesting prospect. And there's also stuff like distributed actors as well that will be really exciting to see. So.
Yeah, you're pointing very much towards the goal of Swift 6, right? Which really wants to embrace the developer experience, where you don't have to think about memory or you know, like the things should be more. You can take things for granted in a way. They just work as expected.
Yeah, it's very similar to like the kind of new cohort of languages like Rust and Go. So Rust has a fantastic memory model where you can't write unsafe code unless you try really, really hard. And Swift is kind of going down that route, and it makes Rust a really great language for a wide range of applications, and Swift will kind of follow in that footsteps, I think.
Are you now promoting Rust in a Swift panel?
It'd be interesting to see a Rust to Swift cross-compilation project. But Rust has a way too high learning curve, I think. If you come from like a background of doing kind of C and C++, where you're used to managing memory, you can kind of get your head around it. If you're coming from higher level languages like Python and Java and Swift, it's a bit of a, I'll try not to swear, it's a bit of a, it's a learning curve. It's a learning curve.
Yeah, I see. I think they even did something where Rust can be working together with Swift. I happen to see something about it.
But it all uses LLVM under the hood, so you can all compile it into the same thing.
Yeah, which is a trending topic either way, right? Multi-platform, how to work together with languages and such. How's that for you, Daniela? How do you look at the current state of Swift? Is there anything challenging or missing in your opinion?
I love Swift. I remember when I was, I'm fairly new to Swift, unlike some people have been developing since the beginning of iOS. But when I first saw Swift, it was like, okay, this is cool. This is very nice language, readable, reminds a lot of Python. I understand things here. When I saw Objective-C, I was like, wow, I'm glad we have Swift. when I first started programming, I was looking at C# and Windows platforms, like Windows, no, C#, ugly. But I like Swift. I like how it's progressing. We got async await, something that's been missing from Swift and it's been available in other languages. And I see how it's going well. And it's open source, which I love, and other people are, giving their opinions on how Swift can move forward, how it should look like, what we can bring to it, what we can change. So I think it's in a good place, and it's going to be better with years coming.
Yeah. Is that something you do as well, like open source contributions? Do you feel empowered enough to
I haven't done it yet, but I would love to do that one day.
Yeah, I think it's great if you at WWDC as well. There was, I think it was it Try Swift that did like the workshop of open source contributions. So for those that don't know, right, Swift is open source, and you can create your own proposals for changes. The Boolean.toggle is Dutch root. Chris Idov did that. But nevertheless, if you see anything that you think needs to be improved, that can be a great way forward.
And I think a Swift work group or someone does like a mentorship, and they help you contribute to the open source.
Gotcha.
Swift.
Okay, I didn't know they could help you.
Cool,
So.
yes.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that
Especially like diversity groups.
Mm-hmm.
The
So that's pretty
mentorship
cool.
program is fantastic.
Yeah, mentorship. Yeah.
So yeah, so the people who don't know, there's a Swift mentorship program that's now running. It used to run every summer, but it's now kind of on a rolling cycle. So if you are coming from like a university background or a non-programming background and you want to get into contributing to Swift or Swift Package Manager or the Swift website or kind of any of the other related projects, you can essentially be assigned a mentor for 12 weeks, I think it is, and they'll help you guide into contributing into either the compiler or the language runtime or foundation or kind of any of those things.
Gotcha. Hey, and Jeremy, I'm curious, right? Like you and Daniela as well, you switched careers in a way. There might still be people in the audience that think about switching careers, or they're in their early days of development with apps. If we look at Swift, there's quite some discussions on the internet as well about the complexity. There's so many keywords you can pick from. The new generic stuff with some in any. I believe it's a classic example of something that if you start today, it might be easier to understand than if you come back from a background where you have the T, where T conforms to protocol, syntax and such, right? What is your vision on the complexity of Swift, and do you think that's a problem, or how do you look at it?
No, so for me it wasn't. So I came from a C# background too, and C# was very much more similar to Swift. So I started developing in iOS with Objective-C. Swift was not around. So when Swift came on the scene, it was a welcome switch for me, because for me it was easier. I did not enjoy Objective-C as much because it was completely different to everything I had done up to that point. So no, I don't think it's too complex. I think for people who are just starting out, they don't need to try to learn it all. Like, you really need to focus in on learning the basics in one thing and not worry so much about generics. That's something you can pick up later when you're ready, when it makes sense. And I think there's a natural transition when you start learning iOS development. If you start with the basics, eventually you get to a point where learning generics, it's not necessary, but it just comes more naturally.
It's more or less an extra tool in your tool set, right? To be used.
So it's like algorithms. I was doing algorithmic work before I knew what algorithms really were. And then when I started learning algorithms, I was like, oh, okay, I've been doing this. But I've been doing it in a way that's a little more complex, took a lot more code. So learning those actually made it simpler. And I think it's kind of the same way with more advanced concepts with Swift, and that you're probably doing them, you just don't realize it until you actually see it.
Yeah, and it's also about being aware that something exists in a way, right? Like you don't have to know everything, but I think it was actually Daniel that said that as well, right? In his presentation, I show a lot of slides with a lot of code. Don't have to remember it all. It's also just an entry point where you can go on the web and search for a Swiftly article and see if you can find an answer.
Or hacking with Swift.
I shouldn't go this route, should I? But actually, Jeremy, we need to talk about something else.
All right, here it comes.
Who remembers what he phrased yesterday in his talk?
He doesn't like Swift UI.
He doesn't like Swift UI.
I cannot forget.
Can you, can you explain what's going on?
So for me, yeah, see, here it is.
You can run quickly. You know.
It's all right. I don't like it. To me, it is way too similar to React Native. And I did some React Native development, and I hated it with a passion. I only did it so that I could see what it was about, because at one point, everyone was, oh, React Native is the future. No, it's not. And it never was.
I like you more now.
So SwiftUI, to me, at least in its current iteration, seems way too similar to that. And I think a lot of companies who have adopted it so quickly are going to run into problems later. And they're going to have to refactor a lot of it back to a UIKit, a standard model of iOS development. So I mentioned Cricket yesterday. We're using the composable architecture. I had a discussion with a couple of guys last night about it. It works, the composable architecture. It makes it better. But to me, it also makes it bloated and unnecessarily complicated.
So if you have a simple view, you would still use UIKit?
Yes.
And you would still prefer auto layout over SwiftUI?
Yes. I do. I do. It's not that I would, I do. So I just started working for a company, and everybody that we interview, it's how do you feel about SwiftUI? Because we're not using it. So if you really love it, this probably is not the place for you.
But this is an interesting one, right? Like if you search for a job, should I still know UIKit? There were quite a few that were sitting down, I think, at iOS 12 already, and iOS 11, and SwiftUI was introduced in iOS 13. So that means that, especially with older projects, right, you can't go around the fact that you will touch UIKit code, right?
Right.
But I still find your angle interesting, right? Like because that's really focused on UIKit only. How is that for you? How do you look at it? Is it we can start. Yeah,
Not my domain.
I should look at you, right? You never touch SwiftUI, do you?
I have done a little bit of SwiftUI, yeah. So when I was an iOS developer many years ago now, it was all UIKit because SwiftUI was not a thing. I've done a little bit of SwiftUI just for like doing video tutorials and stuff for some Codeco stuff. And I like it in the fact that it's not hacking around limitations in Objective-C. So, for instance, when you're trying to put properties on a view in Objective-C, you generally have to make them implicitly unwrapped optionals because there's no way to initialize a view. Whereas in SwiftUI, you can kind of just pass stuff in. So I really like that fact, but I do not feel qualified to answer that question because I have not used it properly.
Okay, so I won't let you pick a side then. You know. How is that for you? Because
I
you do
love
much more.
SwiftUI.
Right? Yeah.
I
There you go.
love
There you go.
It's amazing. I've used UIKit and I know UIKit, but I mean auto layout like Jeremy. I love SwiftUI. I love how easy it is to create something real fast. How it makes you think differently about your UI. I don't know. It kind of fits the way you think. I love it, and I think you can make apps much faster and much easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm all pro SwiftUI.
Yeah, it's actually stated, I think, in the keynote or the State of the Union this year, the best way to create apps today is SwiftUI, and obviously Apple tries to push for it, but you can also clearly tell from the apps that they rebrand, renew every year. We got the weather app now on all platforms, also mostly because of SwiftUI, I think, also Catalyst, of course, but if we were to give advice to somebody starting or already started with SwiftUI knowledge today, but they still want to embrace UIKit because they know they will touch it at their job, what would you advise? Like, is there like a guidance we can give in terms of that like a minimum you should probably learn?
It's hard, but I have an opinion on that. I've just been running this bootcamp for the past 3 months, and students have been learning SwiftUI completely, making like a capstone project, a fully app with SwiftUI. We gave them a little bit of UIKit to see, just so they are familiar with it,
Yeah.
and to implement UIKit in a SwiftUI app. And it's a struggle to understand UIKit coming from SwiftUI. But I think people coming from UIKit understand SwiftUI more.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot more companies out there, I think, who are still working with UIKit more than SwiftUI. I'm lucky. We use SwiftUI in production. We just released an app in SwiftUI. Some of the components are still in UIKit because SwiftUI misses them.
Yeah.
But I think it works great.
Yeah, I think it's more or less, more and more gaps will be filled, right, over the next releases. They already did it. If I look at WeTransfer, what we do is we use SwiftUI for most of the fields, but we still have like a UI collection view for more control, or like a navigation controller for more control in terms of the navigation stack, which improved as well with the latest APIs this year. I wanna switch gears a bit, and I wanna actually come back to the pick a side that we had, Tim. And I'm not gonna make you choose between cartridge and CocoaPods, but I wanna discuss SPM. I sometimes have discussions with companies, and they ask me like advice or questions, and this is always a question that comes back because how many of you are still using CocoaPods? You see that? And cartridge? Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, and SPM? That should be the other hand, right? Or you have no packages. If you don't have any packages, you should talk with Daniel. But it turns out, and that was surprising to me at least, that there are so many companies still using CocoaPods, and I can obviously think about the reasons to do so, but I'm really keen to hear what you think of the state of SPM today, and whether or not they should move.
Yeah, so like, so Swift Package Manager has been available for iOS since Xcode 12 or Xcode 13, one of those. But on the server, we've been using it since Swift 3 because it's the only way you could build server apps. So it's definitely come a long way since then. I think some of the latest stuff around binary artifacts, where you can pull in frameworks through a Swift Package Manager declaration, is filling a big hole. I think it's like, I would say that probably most apps these days, if you're starting out, will use Swift Package Manager, I would have thought. I think there's probably still a few projects or dependencies you can only pull in through CocoaPods, but you can run them side by side, I believe, Swift Package Manager and CocoaPods, if you want to migrate over slowly, in some way at least. I think Swift Package Manager is clearly the future. Apple are pushing it heavily, and it will be the way to go when all the kind of holes are filled. And I think there aren't many things that are missing. I definitely agree with Daniel in that there should be a way of declaring a package is only available on a certain platform. So this package is only available for iOS rather than having to hack it in. But generally, I don't think it's missing much now.
So there's no reason to not go to SPM, is what you say?
It depends on the company you're working for. So I can imagine if you're working for, say, a bank or a healthcare company or any kind of largely regulated company where you need to be very clear about where your dependencies are coming from, I can see it's a lot easier to run a private CocoaPods mirror than it is to run a private Swift Package Manager mirror. That will change when the Swift Package Registry stuff is finally embraced. So that would be one reason, but I think I can't really see many other reasons to use CocoaPods over Swift Package Manager unless you're doing some really gnarly stuff in your pod file to kind of manipulate dependencies or pre-build instructions and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm almost afraid to ask, but Jeremy.
No, so I like SPM. Still use CocoaPods too. Hate Carthage. So, but no, I try not to use packages at all, if possible. Sometimes you have to because.
Daniel.
Here we go. No, so if moving forward, we've tried to rely solely on SPM. and move away from CocoaPods. But like he says, I'm not working currently with industries that are highly regulated or, highly secret. So we don't need that. So SPM works fine for us.
Makes sense. And Daniela, do you think, and this might be a bad question to ask for myself, I'll explain later, but do you think all open source packages should still support CocoaPods as well, or can they switch over?
I think they can switch over. I think Swift PM is at a nice state right now. I use Swift PM a lot. We use modularized architecture, so we have a lot of packages. Swift Package Manager still has a few issues. Sometimes I yell at it 5 times a day.
Why? What are the issues you're facing?
Caching. It just throws an error. Please resolve these package issues. Sometimes I have to completely restart my laptop to make it work.
Oh, really?
Delete derived data. It's just annoying at times, but I like it.
It's
Prefer
still a
it
thing.
over CocoaPods.
It's still a thing, right? Delete derived data.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most popular recent features in RocketSim actually. That people started using it heavily. And I think there's one proposal that didn't make it through, and they used Firebase as an example, and it's not to blame Firebase, but Firebase has many packages defined, right? And if you pull in Firebase, it means that all the packages are downloaded, even though you use only a few. And I think one of the proposals was as well, and this is me describing a limitation that I see, is that you want to define sub-packages. And I'm not sure how much experience you have with it, but they told me I read in the proposal that the Swift package registry should be a solution to it. Do you have any idea about what's coming up for that, or do you use Swift package registry?
Well, I know what's coming up because we've been talking about it for a while. So the Swift package registry is a way of defining a new way of pulling down packages. So in Swift Package Manager currently, if you add a dependency, you add a dependency to Git. And you say, here's the Git registry or Git repository where the package lives, clone that repository, check out the version, and then it works. The package registry will use some sort of file store, like S3 or cloud storage, or even just like a file server, and you say, here's 1.1.2 of this package, and you can pull it down directly as a blob. And that provides a number of benefits. First off, it means it's a lot harder for packages to change their versions. So if you've already tagged something as 1.1.2, you can't then remove the tag and tag a different commit, because the package registry will know that this version has this SHA and you can't change it. It also means it's a lot easier for companies to run internal mirrors. So big companies and regulated companies need to run internal mirrors of dependencies so that they can ensure what they're putting down is legit. And that makes it a lot easier as well, because you can just point to a private mirror and say, use this registry, rather than say the registry at swift.org or wherever it will live. So it is possible to build a registry now. Artifactory have shipped a registry that you can use if you use Artifactory. There's been some talk about integrating it with somewhere in the Swift ecosystem, whether that's swift.org or Swift Package Index or another place, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that come out in the next year or so.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a huge step forward, and I believe in that that same discussion forum around the large packages is that you could basically define subpaths as well, so you can really pull in like a subpackage only, and only have to pull that in. So that could be a great improvement for those use cases that I just described. And one thing that triggered me as well, Tim, you said build artifacts fill in quite a big gap. Is from your perspective, but for me, it didn't ring a bell, or I'm not using it other than I think for Swift Lint and the build plugins right now. But can you give us a bit more information why you think that fills a big gap?
Sure. So if you're pulling down, so if you want to release a private dependency where you don't want to ship the source code, so it could be like a library that you write that interacts with your API or kind of does authentication, and you don't want to ship the source code so people can see what it does. There's no way to do that, or there was no way to do that with Swift Package Manager, because you can't just ship a XE framework or anything. That was released a while ago, I think it was last year, where you can define a path to a binary artifact, which is your exe framework. And that means that you can just pull in the exe framework without actually to ship the source code and get it compiled. So that provides benefit of quicker compilation times because the framework's already compiled, and also means that if you are trying to ship something you don't want to show the code of, you can do that.
Cool. Yeah, I'm learning stuff as well. I think that's a good insight as well. I'm not knowing everything either. All right. Yeah, let's switch gears. And Jeremy, I'm fascinated by the Swift Developer Academy, and I believe you will do a great job helping developers grow and find their next career step. I believe, which makes it interesting to discuss. Like, what do you think engineers can do to level up their career? Is there any advice you can already give in terms of making that next step?
Yeah, so soft skills are number one. Mm-hmm. People put way too much focus on the technical side of their career, and they don't learn the soft side nearly as hard. But if you can't communicate, if you can't collaborate, then your technical skills are virtually useless because they're siloed just to you. So yes, you definitely need to learn the technical side. You need to learn about coding and all of the fun stuff that goes with that, but don't ignore the rest of it, the collaboration, the communication. So getting involved in communities and learn how to talk and ask questions and give answers and explain very technical things in a very non-technical way. That is the key to success in engineering.
You make it sound easy.
It's not. It's really not. But I guess I developed the soft skills first and then picked up the technical skills.
Yeah.
So for me, it was very easy. But for most people, it's not. It's very hard. It's a lot harder to explain something incredibly technical in a non-technical way to people who have no idea about technology at all. They think that everything we do is black magic.
Yeah.
Right?
No, yeah. It reminds me. I for my newsletter, I wrote down an intro and I explained how I approach my articles, and I tell them like, I always pretend to explain the code to my mom, because if my mom understands, everybody understands. And I got replies like, hey, you pretend like all moms are stupid. And I was like, no, this is about my mom, right? She's not listening. But I think you make a really good point. Soft skills are super important. And yesterday, like during this conference, this is all about soft skills as well, right? Like approach people and talk with people. When you grab a coffee, don't feel intimidated and just say hi to somebody. Only a hi can already open a door to a discussion. And we were sitting with speakers yesterday for dinner, and we had a few other attendees around us as well. And like that should be a great way to get into conversations and make yourself more comfortable. But it's definitely not easy, like you say, and it's something you need to practice by doing and find yourself in those situations. I almost want to go into the audience topic, so think through your ideas. Daniela, I wondered, you did a presentation yesterday about building a website. And there's all kinds of websites that you can do, right? You can do blogging, you can do just a portfolio with your history of projects or your resume. Do you think it's in a way crucial to have a website as an engineer if you want to find your new job?
Not necessarily. It is definitely a good thing to have, but in GitHub, most of us have GitHub, I think. You can actually create sort of a website or a portfolio introduction if you create like a markdown file with your GitHub surname, and then that's the first thing when somebody opens your GitHub, they can see that. I think that can as well serve the purpose, but again, that is kind of your website. So it is good to have. It is good to have a place to showcase your skills. I had a different website when I was starting out, where I showcased my side projects that I did when I was
Yeah.
searching for a job. I built a weather app, a to-do app, everything everyone builds. And a lot of people actually took a look and told me, oh, I saw the apps you built, they look great. Your design skills, then I saw your GitHub, your coding skills. It definitely helps out.
It can also decrease your chances,
It can, yeah. I
right?
guess.
Because that's what people often forget, right? Like your public GitHub profile is great, but I'm not sure if you know, but you might have repositories publicly open there as well that are like 4 years old.
Graveyard of apps.
Uncommented code, or like I don't know, documented code is missing, or no tests, or I don't know. Just make sure that you know which repositories are public, I guess. I have some more topics, but I want to ensure that we give the audience the chance to bring in something trending. Should we stay on Twitter, or should we go to how do you pronounce it actually? Is it Mastodon? Mastodon? Who has a good topic for us? Feel free to challenge us.
Be gentle.
Why? I'm not surprised, Axel.
It should be a question, right?
It is the question.
Are you going to ask for a giveaway?
No. Actually, I was surprised I didn't get a giveaway yesterday.
I did 2 giveaways, I think, at Do iOS. I'm not sure, was it Do iOS twice, or it was once CocoaHeads, I think, and he won twice.
And I didn't even hack the system. Anywho. Jeremy is started a company with enterprise software, and if I look at big enterprise, you have software that's running for 40 years. Java from 2003 still compiles fine today, if it compiles. So you have very old software. With Swift, you have to basically rewrite your apps every year. Is Swift a viable option for the enterprise?
Yeah, I think the claim that you have to rewrite it every year might be a little exaggerated. But no, I think it's fine. I mean, I've been writing enterprise apps for enterprise clients for, over 10 years, and it's.
Software in general.
Oh, software in general. Enterprise software is a nightmare. So that's why I got out of full stack development and went to mobile, because I was sick of the chaos and the nightmare, because it's too many companies are not interested in actually fixing the problem. They just want to throw a Band-Aid on it and, hey, we'll hack to make it work. And then, next year, okay, well, this is broke now, so let's hack the hack. And then you have no foundation because it's just a bunch of garbage. So no, I think that enterprise mobile apps are much easier to maintain and make solid. But luckily, we don't have to deal with the server side nonsense.
You're starting another fight, isn't it? But this is interesting, right? You mentioned rewriting, and I think Donnie did a great job yesterday in explaining us how you can adopt new technologies as well, right? I don't think you should have a reason to rewrite every year. I'm not sure how you think about it, but shouldn't we be able to manage that?
Yeah, I don't think we need to rewrite every year. There certainly are Swift versions where something breaks and then you just have to fix it, but not rewrite.
Right.
I've seen enterprise apps written in Swift with a little bit of Objective-C still behind, because it takes a while, right, to rewrite from one language to another. But I think Swift works great for at least iOS apps.
Yeah. Tim, I know you are rewriting stuff, aren't you?
Yeah, I think there's a perception that Swift evolves too quickly, and I think that's out of date now. I think in the early days, certainly it changed a lot. I think these days it hasn't. I've got Vapor 4 projects that have been running for 2.5 years that were built in Swift 5.2, and they still compile with the latest compiler with no problem. So I think there's definitely perception that things change too quickly, and I think that perception's out of date. I think if you want to embrace the latest stuff and use Swift concurrency and use Sendable, and then you've got to rewrite your apps and make them better. And that's what sets you apart from if you're a tech company or if you're an open source framework or whatever. That's what sets you apart from your kind of competitors. Because if you're a developer coming to server-side Swift, or if you're a developer coming to an iOS library, and you pick one that hasn't been touched in 2 years, or you pick one that's regularly maintained and uses Swift concurrency, you're going to pick the one that's maintained and uses the latest features because they're the latest features for a reason that make your life easier.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes sense. And write your apps in Swift UI to be prepared for the future.
Or you could just wait till it fizzle out, kind of like React Native did. It was a thing, then people moved away from it.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
yeah.
I'm again, Swift UI will eventually be great. And again, Cricket's app was a great app, so I don't want to completely disparage Swift UI. It's just not my preference.
That makes me feel already better.
Olive
Yes.
branch.
All right, I think we have 5 more minutes. We could do one more topic from the audience. All right, there's a lot of hands. You can pick, you want to throw as far? Or
Thank you. My question is about cross-platform alternatives, because I've heard also some big companies in the Netherlands started to embrace Flutter, and then also of course React Native. So I'm really curious how everyone thinks about the development of cross-platform, and do they pose a threat to native iOS development?
who wants to start? I was thinking maybe
Yeah.
you've got an interesting angle in.
So I've been lucky. I never had to do React Native.
This is interesting already, right? you feel yourself lucky, but that's
Yeah, from what I heard about it. But I've seen Flutter a little bit. Haven't worked with it. Lucky again. But I have a colleague who is an iOS developer who's been doing Flutter for a year and a half. And every time I ask him, how is it going? Don't ask me.
yeah.
It's very young. From what I can see, misses a lot of features still.
Yeah, there's so many things going on in multi-platform world, and there's I think great initiatives that are much better than ever before. I once had the invite to go to Florida for a multi-platform Coney platform, which I mostly did for the business trip because you can go into the plane and the company pays. I regret it because it was painful in the end because I was, the 80%, 20% story, right? The most of the simple cases you can get done, and then the more custom solutions are harder to write. But it's also very much UI focused now. And how do you look at Kotlin multi-platform, or maybe just writing your business layers in a common language? Is that something you've experienced, or do you have an opinion about?
I've got opinions. I think from a user's point of view, it's very easy to tell when an app is cross-platform because it's terrible and it doesn't fit in with the platform paradigms, and copy and paste doesn't work, and gestures don't work. But from a developer's point of view, I think cross-platform stuff is interesting if you're trying to use the language in the way it was designed. I think if you're trying to interface between different languages, I think that's when it gets really difficult. Even things like Kotlin multi-platform are not great experiences. The build times are horrific, and you lose a lot of the kind of type safety, and you use a lot of the reasons for using Swift to save basically a bit of time, and they end up kind of switching. It costs you more time in the end to fix all of the different bugs. And I think a lot of big companies have seen this, like Airbnb and Dropbox, and a load of other companies have moved away from using like a shared C++ library or a shared JavaScript library because, you end up writing for N+1 platforms instead of N platforms.
And I think Chris Latner once said world domination, isn't it? So maybe we should just wait till we can do multi-platform with Swift, and we just write Swift, and we'll let the other side handle the problems. But it's interesting, right? Like if we look forward, I totally see value in writing once, run everywhere. So unless there's no more Android phones in the future or something, but I don't want to go that route. I think we're close to the end.
Yeah, one more thing. No, the cross-platforms will never be a threat to native development, ever. Ever. I'm very confident about that.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. You know, you started to grow in the panel. That's you know. You know, Tim and Danielle, I spoke with them before, but Jeremy, I didn't met him before, and I met him yesterday in quite a, well, stressful situation, but you handled it really well. He was working on his slides yesterday, and he explained me. Wasn't it surprising that, you know, he ran into that issue, but he had his second laptop with him? I was like...
You learn to travel with two.
It almost feels like you knew that this was going to happen, you know.
You learn to travel with two. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, or you should make backups, isn't it? That's something you learn.
Well, no, normally it is backed up, but this was the first presentation I've ever done with PowerPoint, so I'd always use Keynote, and I didn't hook up my OneDrive. So.
Yeah. Now it's all explained, you know.
We can do one or two more.
One or two more. We got approval. All right. Yeah, I saw some more hands, so we can do one more.
Yes. Yeah.
All right?
Is it open? Yeah. Do you copy? So my question is about sharing what we know, sharing knowledge. So I know Antoine is for the profit, the money. I'm joking. But
true.
just can you give advice on the way to motivated colleagues to share what they know? I mean, internally in your daily job, and also publicly in blogs or conferences, and so what could be the good words that we could give to them?
Yeah, and I think you're a good example. You're doing a talk later today, if I'm correct. Yeah, so knowledge sharing, so to say, right? I think maybe it's interesting to start with you, Daniela, because you wrote an article this week, I know. Yeah. Maybe you can take us on that journey, like why you decided to start writing articles and how you approached it and why it works for you.
Yeah, I think I started with Revenderlich or Codeco. It's a great way to learn by teaching, by writing articles, having to explain something to someone. You have to like kind of pick the words, write in a specific way. Just because it's you can understand it doesn't mean someone else can understand it. I learn a lot with writing. I love to learn that way. Teaching others as well through boot camp or something else by mentoring someone is a great way to teach, especially if you're teaching a beginner and having to understand in more depth. You think you understand something, but then you realize, wait, I cannot explain this. I have to look at more deeply, and then you're trying to explain to someone, and then you have to explain in different ways, and then when that person gets it, it's like, okay, now I can say I understand it. But I started it as a way to learn myself.
Yep.
And it's also a great way to give back to community. You know, there are a lot of great resources out there, people who put in their time to give us, you know, Hacking with Swift, Swiftly, Donnie, a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to give back as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think an important part you mentioned is that, you know, in a way you're writing your own personal knowledge base. And we all need to stay up to date with the new technologies. And everyone has its own way of learning. But for me personally as well, when I learn, I want to write things down because that's how I remember, and I want to play around with it. And when I started writing my articles, I decided to write down my learnings in an article and share it with others as well. And yeah, it won't surprise you that I often revisit my own articles to see like how did I do it back in the days, right? And I think that's a great starting point to, you know, share knowledge both externally and internally. But I think another thing, and that's what you all did yesterday already, is speaking. And I'm actually curious, Tim, I see you a lot at conferences, so you're an experienced speaker, but you started once as well. And stepping up on stage, although it might sound like going quite easy, it's always challenging, right? Like potentially nervosity, or like you still need to do the job. But especially the first time, I remember I had like a Red Bull and it was going everywhere. But how did you manage to get started speaking? Because that can be a great way to educate a team as well, internally and externally.
Yeah, so I think the first time I spoke, it was terrible, and it was not a good talk at all. But I think a really good way to kind of get into speaking and sharing is going to meetups and speaking at meetups, because the audience is a lot smaller. So instead of talking to 130 people, you'd be talking to 10, 15 people. And whenever I do a new talk, I always do it at a meetup first, because until you've actually run through a talk in front of an audience, you can never really find out how it's going to go and how it's paced and like what works and stuff. So I think that's how I kind of got into talking, was doing meetups, and then kind of carving a niche for myself in the server-side Swift world, and getting talks that way. But it is just practice. Like, it's just going up, standing up, talking to people, and doing it over and over again. There's no like secret to it.
Yeah.
And no one's born a good public speaker.
No, exactly.
You just sort of practice it.
Which brings us to soft skills, Jeremy. Is there like an angle you can give us, like what would be a great way to, get better at sharing knowledge in an approachable way for somebody that might be more scared to do so?
So instead of approaching it as instructing, right, or teaching, just approach it as a conversation. Because I think too many people put the stress on, if I instruct, then I have to be an expert at it. Like, I have to know, I can't make a mistake, I can't say anything wrong. No, it's more of just a conversation. So with all of my teams, you ask about how you could knowledge share at work. We have a lunch and learn every Friday. And one member from the team will teach something. I don't care what it is. It can be tech related, it can be not even related to what we do, as a company. But that way, it just gets them used to sharing knowledge with each other.
Yeah.
And to do it in a way, again, that's more conversational, right? I think a lot of people view instructors as, it's more intimidating to be an instructor. It's more intimidating to teach. But if you're just talking, right, then do it as if you're explaining it just to yourself. Like you say, you're writing down your own learnings. Yeah. So if you take that approach, I think it's a lot easier than, I'm going to teach you something new. No, I'm going to tell you what I know.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And if you know it, that's fine. But if you don't, okay. And if I'm wrong, then maybe you'll let me know.
Yeah, and I think the lunch and learn sessions were great. We do that at WeTransfer as well, and we make it even more approachable. We just pick a WWDC session or an article, and we discuss it together. So there's nobody front and forward having to prepare something or anything. So it's really like a joint way of learning a new topic that we all agreed on learning. It's like removing barriers and step by step growing into like sharing knowledge. One more, let's do it.
Now I need to choose. But
Yeah.
I've seen your hand before.
I'm happy that you do that.
Not sure if it can be answered in short. I'm a big fan of core data, and so I was wondering what is your take on it, because like I really like it. Sorry guys, I hope I didn't.
I'm fine with this topic.
Okay.
I like core
anyway,
data.
like it's not really Swifty. Like it's still
True.
Object oriented, and it's like more for the Objective-C. Is there any way that it would be more Swifty? What is your take? Or is it in its own ideal shape, and we should just take it as it is right now?
Yeah. So if there's one topic that I discussed the most at WWDC Dev Labs, it's core data. And I remember sitting down, and before that, I was looking up to the Apple engineers, right? And I asked him a core data question, and he said, like, well, I'll just open the framework and we'll look into the actual code, right? And core data is old, right? Bear with me, but yeah, I saw the quality of the code, and I was like, oh boy, okay. So people at Apple, or engineers at Apple, are people as well, right? They're writing code. Nevertheless, it's an old framework, right? And I think there's a lot of debates. We've seen Realm coming by, a very popular framework as well. but it's not super Swifty yet integrated in Swift UI. What is your take on it, Core Data? Nobody wants to take this one, you know.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we have some angles, right? Because maybe you can put it from the server side stuff eventually. But Daniela, maybe you can start with from a app perspective. Is it something that you use, or is it something you try to stay away from?
I've used Core Data. We currently aren't using it in our app, but I've just recently played around with Core Data in Swift UI. I gave my students homework on Core Data in Swift UI. It was a mess. They've struggled a lot. It's hard to understand. I think once you make it work, you leave it there. It's working. You don't touch it. But I like Core Data.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing that we just have to understand is Core Data is much older than Swift.
Yeah.
It's been around for a very long time.
Yep.
And when it's working quite well.
Classic. Yeah, true. Okay. Tim doesn't want to take this one.
I
You
mean,
see that?
I can talk about it, but it's
No,
not-
so I love core data. But again, I started iOS development with Objective-C. So for me, I've never thought of it as not being Swifty. It works for me. But I also did work as a DBA for a while, so I love databases.
Gotcha, yeah.
So I love to find ways to use core data the way that I want to use it, not necessarily the way that it was intended to be used.
You're going deeper. You
Yes.
write your own queries.
Right, and
Yeah.
that's the best way to learn. So
Yeah.
if you don't like core data, dive in there and figure out how to make it do
Yeah.
what you want it to do as opposed to what they tell you it can do.
I think there's even an interesting open source framework that's built on this perspective, right? Where they go way more advanced with actual queries that you can write.
Yes.
But it's also, I was part of the Johnson Dell's podcast where we did the WWDC sent our wishes. And I think my wish was like something Swifty with core data. And eventually somebody pointed me to the fact like, you don't want to migrate all apps to a new version of core data because, you know, it's an incredible project, right? It's so huge. And I totally think there's going to be like a newer version that's more Swifty, but it's going to be an opt-in version. It's not going to be migrating like the older part of it. It's my take on it. But you don't know anything about new stuff around core data coming out.
No, I've never touched core data in my life. It's fantastic. I know that it's SQLite under the hood, essentially, and I do a lot of database stuff, and managing migrations on the server is complex, but at least you have backups.
Yeah.
I think on the iOS world, you can't go and run a backup on everyone's phone if you mess something up. So
You can actually.
You can?
Yeah,
Okay,
if you do migrations, you better make a backup because
Cool. So I never have to touch
Jeremy.
it. I would love to say use an API or a server instead, but that's not always possible when it comes to like low data connections or no network connection or anything. So
yeah.
you need some kind of data store.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, to round up, core data works great unless you start to rethink your models and you need to do migrations. If there's something not really well documented, it's going to be core data migrations. I think Donnie did a great job with his book, but still it's always challenging because it's a case-per-case scenario. And I've done a few at WeTransfer for Collect, and it's still one of our top issues because there's random edge cases where people then had several models installed and such. You know, I guess it's the pain that you have with databases in general. But yeah, shall we round up? Great way to end, right? End with core data.
Yeah, always. It's
That's
always
the
going to be
one
core
that
data.
sticks.
But
Yeah.
about core data migrations, you can actually do that fine because I worked at an iPad app with like millions of objects in it, and we were just migrating fine. And it didn't matter what version to what version of the model we were migrating. But it takes effort to do that right, because
As
auto
long as-
migrations does not work in core data.
As long as it's a lightweight migration, I think that's the key here. If
That
it's-
didn't work for us.
Yeah.
So we did it basically manually every single time.
Yeah, and that's what I had to do. Yeah, there you go.
And then you write a lot of interesting things. First of all, to all four of you, thank you for being willing to sit on this brightly lit stage for us and take questions and just have a discussion. Some key takeaways that I took from the entire conversation is that, well, if you want to do something, want to share something online, well, of course, people always, they start with, okay, I want to do something that does something to the world, or I can actually make money with it. But I think it's very important that if you do something and you want to do it consistently, that you find something that you enjoy. Because if you enjoy something, then the rest will follow.
Yeah.
And about getting started with things like writing articles, doing presentations, find your local meetup organization. Like here in Amsterdam, we have CocoaHeadsNL, but other cities, they have their own similar things going on. And if you go to those meetups, you will find that there's like a group of people who basically has the same technology itch that you will have, and that are perfectly willing to have a conversation with you, and that are perfectly willing to just review your work, provide helpful advice, put you on stage and give you feedback in a way that is not, it's not deprecating of your personality. It actually builds you up in gaining experience and gaining valuable feedback. So really go look for that if you are back at home, really. And another one that I wanted to mention, that was Mastodon. Yesterday, CocoaHeadsNL sponsored iOSdev.space. That's a Mastodon instance. Go look at it. It's weird. I'm still getting used to it. It's not Twitter, and you have to keep that in mind. That it's like it's not Twitter. It's different. And with that, do you have anything to add, Antoine?
Well, I think Jeremy still loves SwiftUI a little bit. There's hope. SPM is the way forward, and yeah, WordPress is the way forward.
Oh, and
no, I want to thank you all for joining me. It's my first panel. I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for the input from the audience, and yeah, thanks you.
And there's one more thing, because if you're as an app developer do not want to deal with backends, we got some perfect sponsors for that.
Hey.
You don't have to do any backend, well, maybe a little bit, but it's just a little bit of glue JavaScript, but they can take you really, really far without having to do any real backend work. But if you do enjoy backend work, then go talk to Tim, because he can tell you what magical things you can really do with Vapor on the backend. And if you want to look for a big open source project that uses Vapor, go look at the Swift Package Index, because it's a nice, well-structured code base that just going through it, you will already learn a lot more beyond documentation that is available with Vapor. And there's a lot more open source projects out there to just have a look at. We have drinks. Non-alcohol, of course.
Oh, damn it.
Till I think 1:45, and then we'll start with the next session by Leia, if I'm correct.